The first time I saw my father's name in 20 years, I was standing in my kitchen with a dish towel in one hand and a letter in the other, and I swear my whole body went cold before I even opened it. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and old enough to feel important. My name was written across the front in careful black ink, the kind of handwriting that looked like it belonged to someone who never rushed and never apologized. The return address was from a law office in downtown Chicago, and beneath that, in smaller print, there was a note that made my stomach drop. Open only on your 30th birthday, or in the event of my death. My father had been dead for 3 days. I sat down so hard at the edge of my kitchen chair that it scraped against the tile floor. My apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the rain tapping against the window over the sink. I remember staring at that envelope like it might bite me. For 20 years, my father had been a wound I learned how to keep covered. Not healed, never healed, just covered enough that I could function. And now he was back in my life through a letter from beyond the grave. My hands were shaking when I broke the seal. Inside was a single page. My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, then I am finally gone, and it means I kept my promise longer than I deserve. You were right to hate me. You were right to leave. You were right about almost everything, except the one thing that mattered most. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking you to go to the address below and ask for the box with my name on it. Everything I stole from you is inside it, along with the truth I should have told you 20 years ago. If you throw this letter away, I will understand. If you come, then maybe I'll get one last chance to stop being the father I failed to be. There was a second line, written in a darker ink, almost like an afterthought. Do not trust your Aunt Marlene. I read that line 3 times. My aunt. My father's younger sister. The woman who had practically raised me after he threw me out. The woman who once brought me soup when I had the flu. Who called every Christmas. Who cried at my graduation. Who told me, over and over, that family was family, no matter how badly it cracked. My chest tightened. I looked at the envelope again, and for the first time in years, I felt 13 years old. 13. Standing in our living room while my father pointed at the front door and told me I was a burden to this family. 13. Watching my mother turn away because she was too scared of him to defend me. 13. Listening to my little brother laugh under his breath like this was all some joke I was too sensitive to understand. I hadn't thought about that night in a long time. Not because I forgot it, but because some memories live under your skin. You do not remember them. You carry them. I sat there in my kitchen with the rain pounding harder now, and the letter in my hand, and I knew with a kind of terrible certainty that my whole life had just split into before and after. Before the letter, I was just Emma Walsh, 30 years old, a middle school English teacher in a small apartment I rented alone on the south side of Chicago, a woman who kept her world small because small worlds could not be taken from you as easily. After the letter, I was the daughter of a dead man who had one final secret left to ruin me or save me. It started 20 years earlier, in a house that always felt too expensive to belong to people like us. My father, Robert Walsh, was the kind of man other people respected from a distance. He wore crisp shirts, polished shoes, and a face that made him look calm even when he was angry enough to make the air dangerous. He owned a chain of hardware stores with my uncle, and by the time I was old enough to understand money, I was old enough to understand that my father cared more about what people thought of him than what they felt about him. My mother, Diane, was the opposite. Soft-spoken, nervous, always trying to make peace before there was anything to fight about. She loved flowers, old movies, and singing along to the radio when she thought no one was listening. She was the kind of woman who apologized when someone else bumped into her in a grocery store. And then there was my younger brother, Tyler. Tyler was 4 years younger than me, blonde and broad-shouldered, and born with a kind of smile that made adults forgive him before he even knew what he'd done wrong. My father adored him, not secretly, openly. Tyler could do no wrong, and I learned early that I was expected to be grateful when I was included at all. When I was little, I thought this was just how families worked. Boys were allowed to take up space. Girls were meant to be useful. I cooked. I cleaned. I watched Tyler when my parents went out. I got perfect grades because I knew praise in our house was earned, not given. And when my father was in a good mood, he would rest a hand on my shoulder and say, "You're a smart girl, Emma. Don't get ideas above your station, and you'll do fine." I used to think that was a compliment. The first crack in our family happened when I was 13, and my mother found out my father had been hiding money. Not just a little, not a mistake, a full second set of books. I remember the night because the argument started so quietly, I thought. At first, they were talking, not fighting. My mother found the papers in the study. My father denied everything. Then the shouting began, and Tyler and I stood at the top of the stairs pretending not to listen. My mother was crying. My father was furious. And somewhere between one slammed drawer and the next, he said the words that changed everything. "You don't understand business, Diane. I'm protecting this family." Protecting us turned out to mean hiding debt, moving money around, and letting my uncle take the blame when things went bad. My Uncle Vince was the younger brother. He was loud, funny, generous, and terrible with numbers. He trusted my father completely. My father used that trust like a blade. The day the police showed up was the day our family stopped being a family in any real sense. I was 16 then, and I came home from school to find a black sedan in our driveway. My mother sitting at the kitchen table with red eyes, Tyler eating cereal like nothing was wrong, and my father pacing near the window with his jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. He had been arrested that morning on charges tied to fraud, false filings, and embezzlement. My Uncle Vince had already learned enough to know my father had set him up to absorb part of the damage, if the whole thing came crashing down. It was the kind of betrayal that did not just break trust, it rearranged history. My father fought it. He hired expensive lawyers. He denied. But once people started looking, they found everything. Not enough to put him away for decades, just enough to destroy what was left of the image he cared so much about. My mother nearly left him then. I remember her with a suitcase by the front door, her hands trembling as she told me to pack my things, but she didn't leave. That was my mother's tragedy. She never knew how to leave a bad thing before it became her whole life. So we stayed. The house got quieter. My father got meaner. Tyler got older and absorbed my father's moods like a sponge. And I learned to disappear into the background so thoroughly that by the time I was 17, even my own father seemed to forget I was in the room until he needed someone to blame. The night he called me a burden, it was because of a letter. I had gotten into Northwestern with a partial scholarship. I still remember the envelope because I'd torn it open in the kitchen with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I was so happy I almost ran to tell him. At the time, I thought it would finally make him proud. He was in the living room when I told him. My mother was behind him on the sofa, silent in the way she got when she sensed danger. Tyler was on the floor with a game controller, not even looking up. "I got in," I said. "Northwestern." I got accepted. For one beautiful second, my father looked blank. Then he said, "You expect us to pay for that?" "No," I said quickly. "I have a scholarship. Mostly. I can work." He leaned back in his chair and gave me a look I will never forget. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been easier. It was disdain, cold and personal. "You really think we can keep carrying you forever, Emma?" I blinked at him. "Carrying me? You're a burden to this family," he said. The room went silent, in the way a room does right before something breaks. I looked at my mother. She stared down at her lap. I looked at Tyler. He was smiling, not even trying to hide it. My father kept going, like he was discussing the weather. "You're expensive. You're emotional. You take and take and take. Do you know how much this family has sacrificed?" I could barely breathe. "I don't ask for anything." "No?" he said. "Then who paid for your school supplies? Who paid for your clothes? Who fed you? Your scholarship doesn't cover everything. You think money appears from nowhere?" I had never felt so small. Then my mother did the cruelest thing she has ever done. She whispered, "Emma, your father is under a lot of stress." That was when I understood. She was not going to save me. No one was. So I went upstairs, packed one suitcase, and left the next morning before sunrise. I was 17 and I had no plan except to survive. A neighbor helped me move into a tiny room above a florist shop near campus. I worked 3 jobs my first semester. I washed dishes at night. tutored freshmen during the day, and answered phones at a dental office on weekends. Sometimes I slept in the library because it was warmer there than in my room. My father did not call. My mother sent cards with checks hidden inside, though I learned not to cash them all. Tyler called once during my sophomore year to ask if I had stolen some family silverware on my way out, because Aunt Marlene claimed a serving spoon was missing, and apparently I was the obvious suspect. I laughed at him then, because if I had not laughed, I would have screamed. My father and I went 20 years without speaking in any real way. He sent a card when I graduated. No message, just a signature. Robert. As if my name was too unimportant to include more than necessary. My mother died when I was 26. Lung disease, the doctor said. Years of stress, the family said in softer voices, as if stress were weather and not something people create. I went back for the funeral because I loved her in the complicated way you can love someone who never protected you. She had aged fast in the last few years. Her hair had gone gray at the temples. Her hands had grown thin and shaky. She held my face when I arrived and cried so hard she could barely speak. "Your father is trying," she whispered to me in the hallway after the service. "He's not the same man he was." I wanted to ask her which man she meant. The one who ruined his brother? The one who called me a burden? The one who let me leave with one suitcase and never invited me back? But she was dying even as she said it, and I could not make her carry one more truth. When she was gone, I stopped going home entirely. I built a life that felt safe because it was mine. I taught children how to write essays and believe in themselves. I had coffee with friends. I dated one man seriously for 8 months and left when he started joking that my independence thing made me hard to love. I learned that people say a lot of things about family and loyalty, but most of them mean, as long as it costs me nothing. Then, 3 days after my father died, a letter from his lawyer landed in my hands and dragged 20 years of buried pain back into the light. The address on the envelope led me to a building in the Loop, all glass and polished brass and expensive silence. The attorney's name was Harold Stein. His office smelled like leather and old paper. He rose when I entered, a silver-haired man with a face built from careful habits. "Emma Walsh?" he asked. "That's me." He looked at me for one long second in a way that made me instantly wary. "Thank you for coming." That was not how people usually greet the daughter of a dead father they barely know. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. I sat. He did not sit right away, which made me even more nervous. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. I almost laughed. "Are you?" Something flickered in his expression. "Your father requested you be contacted immediately after his passing. He was very specific." I crossed my arms. "About what?" He reached into a folder and pulled out a sealed document with my father's signature on the front. "Before I explain, I need to ask, did you know your father had a private safe deposit box?" I shook my head. "Did you know he had made a separate estate arrangement?" "No." "Did anyone in your family ever mention a trust?" "No." He gave a slow nod, as if that confirmed something he already suspected. "Then I think it would be better if you heard this directly from the document itself." He slid a second envelope toward me. It had my father's handwriting on the front. My name? Emma. Just Emma, written in a way that looked almost nervous. I did not open it right away. "Mr. Stein," I said, "why am I here?" His eyes stayed on me for a long second. "Because your father left everything to your brother." I stared at him. Then he added, "Everything except one box, one letter, and one condition. Under that condition, if your brother attempted to take control of the estate before you were contacted, the remainder would shift to you." My mouth went dry. "My brother?" I said. "Tyler?" "Yes. The same Tyler who couldn't balance a checkbook at 25 and thought tax season was a kind of weather?" The lawyer almost smiled, but it faded quickly. "That Tyler. Yes." I sat back slowly. Why would my father leave him anything? And why would anything shift to me? Harold Stein folded his hands. "Because your father did not tell you the full story of what happened 20 years ago." I stared at him. He opened the folder and began laying out papers on the desk. Bank records, transfer documents, a copy of an old company ledger, names I had not heard in years. My father's signature appeared again and again. "Your father's business problems," he said carefully, were more extensive than what was made public. I looked down at the papers, but I barely understood them. I already knew he was dishonest. Yes, the lawyer said. But you did not know who helped him hide it. That made my pulse jump. What are you talking about? He slid another document toward me, this one with my Uncle Vince's name at the bottom. For years, he said, your Uncle Vince believed he was covering losses and protecting the family. In reality, your father diverted funds into accounts that eventually belonged to a shell corporation created by your Aunt Marlene. I blinked. My aunt? Yes. I laughed once, sharply and without humor. No, that's impossible. Marlene hated my father. Apparently not as much as she hated being poor, he said. I gripped the edge of the desk. He continued. She and your father worked together during the last 18 months before the collapse. They moved money. They shifted records. They arranged for your Uncle Vince to take the largest share of the blame while your father positioned himself to appear only partially responsible. The room seemed to tilt. That family secret was so large and ugly it did not fit inside my head. My father always said my uncle was reckless, I whispered. Your father said many things, Harold replied. Not all of them were true. I looked down again and saw a name on one of the bank forms. Emma L. Walsh. That's me, I said. Yes. My throat tightened. Why is my name on this? The lawyer took a breath. Because your father opened an account in your name when you were 15. He used it to move money out of the business. According to the records, he planned to claim later that the funds were meant for your education. I stared at him in disbelief. He stole in my name? Harold nodded once. The room went silent. I had come expecting maybe a strange apology, maybe a final insult from a dead man. What I had not expected was this proof that the man who had called me a burden had used me as a tool in his own greed. There was more. There was always more. Harold adjusted his glasses and said, Your father made a final set of instructions after your mother died. He added a clause requiring that you personally retrieve the contents of the safe deposit box before the rest of the estate could be distributed. What's in the box? I believe, he said slowly, it contains the true records of the missing funds. A letter explaining why your father did what he did, and a deed. I frowned. A deed to what? He looked me in the eyes. To the house where you grew up. I froze. The house is mine? Not exactly. It is in your name alone if certain documents are authenticated. I could not speak. My father had spent my entire childhood making me feel like I deserved nothing, and now it turned out he had hidden my legal future in a box and given me instructions from beyond the grave. I asked the obvious question. Why? Harold hesitated. That, he said, is the part your father asked to speak to you about himself. He pushed the envelope across the desk. I opened it. Emma, if you are reading this, then the time has come for me to say the things I was too cowardly to say while I was alive enough to hurt you in person. You were not a burden. I was. I ruined my brother. I used your name to hide my theft. I let your mother believe I was protecting the family when I was protecting only myself. And the worst thing I did, the thing I have regretted every day for 20 years, was let you carry the punishment for my shame. I told you that you were expensive because I wanted you to stop asking questions. I told you that you were emotional because I was afraid of what you would see. I told you that you were a burden because I had to make the truth feel smaller than my guilt. I did not know how to be a father to you after the money collapsed. So I became a judge instead. I judged you because I could not bear to judge myself. Your Uncle Vince was innocent of the worst charges, but by the time I realized what Marlene and I had done, it was too late. He had already agreed to shoulder the public blame to spare the family from prison. He thought he was saving us. I let him believe it. There was a time I planned to tell you everything. Then I saw how strong you were becoming on your own, and I feared that if you knew the truth, you would never need me again. That was my final selfishness. The house should have been yours from the beginning. I have enclosed the deed and the records needed to prove it. The savings account in your name is also real. I never gave you a chance to use it because I was afraid you would discover what I had done. That money should have funded your education without a single day of struggle. I am sorry for every night you went hungry because of my cowardice. Your brother does not know the full truth. Marlene has been feeding him lies for years. She believes she can claim the estate because she helped me hide the worst of it. She is wrong. The law will not reward her. I do not ask you to love me. I ask you to finish what I should have done before I was too old and too ashamed to do it myself. There is one more thing. Your mother knew I intended to make this right. She made me promise to wait until after I was gone to tell you. She said you deserved the truth without having to watch me beg for it. I hope this letter reaches you before Marlene does. Robert. I lowered the page slowly. My hands were shaking again. Only now it was not from anger. It was from something more dangerous. Grief. Maybe. Or the sick, dizzy feeling that comes when your entire history gets rearranged in one sitting. My mother knew? I asked. Harold nodded. She did. I looked up, startled. You knew her. I represented your father, he said carefully. But I also met with your mother several times in the final years. She suspected things. Not all of them, but enough. My head was spinning. The lawyer slid another paper across the desk. There is more. I took it. It was a copy of a property record. My name was typed where I expected my father's to be. The house. My childhood house. The ugly, beautiful place where I had learned fear and silence and how to make myself smaller. It's mine? I asked again. If the documents are as authentic as I believe, yes. Then why wasn't I told? Harold's mouth tightened. Because your Aunt Marlene has already been trying to contest the estate. That name again. It landed like a match in gasoline. What exactly does she want? The lawyer gave me a steady look. Control of the business assets, the house, and the remainder of the accounts. She also claims your father intended Tyler to inherit everything outright. I almost laughed. Of course she does. She contacted this office 6 days before your father passed. She was very eager. I leaned forward. What did she tell you? That she was acting in the family's best interests. He paused. And that you would likely try to take what belonged to your brother. My jaw tightened. That sounded just like Marlene. Always honey in the mouth and knives in the hands. She had never liked me. She liked my mother only when my mother was useful. She liked Tyler because Tyler looked like my father. She tolerated me because I was the kind of child adults called sensitive when they wanted to say inconvenient. I stood slowly. I want to see the box. Harold nodded as if he had expected that. Then we should go now. We drove across the city in his black sedan. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the buildings into gray watercolor. I sat in the back seat with the letter in my lap, reading it over and over until I could almost hear my father's voice in the words. Not the cruel voice from my childhood. The voice of a man standing at the end of his life and finally unable to lie fast enough to outrun himself. The safe deposit vault was underground, quiet and cold. The bank employee checked Harold's credentials, then led us to a private room with a metal drawer in the wall. He opened it, removed a box, and placed it on the table between us. My father's name was engraved on the lid. I reached for it, then stopped. Harold noticed. You do not have to do this alone. I almost told him I had done everything alone for so long I did not know the other way. Instead, I nodded and opened the box. Inside were 3 stacks of papers, a small velvet pouch, and a key attached to a yellowing tag labeled Walsh House. The first stack was exactly what Harold had said. Bank records, tax filings, and ledgers. The second was a bundle of letters. The third was a notarized statement naming me as the sole legal owner of the family home, contingent upon the authentication of the enclosed records. At the bottom sat a thick manila envelope with my name written on it in my father's hand. I opened that one last. Inside was a photograph of me at 10 years old, sitting on the front steps of our house, missing one front tooth and grinning with a lemonade stain on my shirt. Beneath the photo was a note. You were my daughter before I knew how to be your father. I failed at both roles, but you were never the burden. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I was not in the bank anymore. I was on those front steps again, hearing my mother laugh from the kitchen, smelling the cut grass, feeling the hot summer air on my face before everything went bad. Then the memory shattered. When I opened my eyes, Harold was watching me with an expression that was almost pity. Do you believe him? He asked. I looked down at the box. I don't know. That was the honest answer. He nodded. The records are real. The rest is for you to decide. I carried the box out of the bank like it weighed more than stone. I did not go home that night. I checked into a hotel instead because I was not ready to be alone with that house key. I spread the papers across the bed and started reading. Bank transfers, dates, account numbers, a trail of money moving in ways my father had hidden well enough that only someone obsessive would notice. And that is when I found the first new lie. My father had not just hidden money. He had hidden my mother's name from the business records too. There were documents showing that after the scandal, he had quietly moved a portion of company shares into a trust that my mother could access only upon his death. That trust had been emptied. By Marlene, not by my father. The transfer signatures were forged. Not perfectly, but well enough to fool anyone who only glanced. I stared at the page for a long time before I realized what it meant. My aunt had not just helped cover up my father's crimes. She had been stealing from the family for years. I made copies of everything that night. At dawn, I called the one person I trusted from the old neighborhood, my Uncle Vince's daughter, Nora. Nora was my age, maybe a little older in the way some people age from stress rather than birthdays. She had the same sharp eyes as her father and the same habit of speaking plainly, which made her terrifying and comforting in equal measure. She answered on the third ring. Emma? I took a breath. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. A pause. That sounds serious. It is. What happened? My father died. Silence. Then carefully, I'm sorry. I'm not asking for condolences. I'm asking what you know about Marlene. That got her attention. Why? Because I think she's been lying for years. Another pause. Then Nora exhaled slowly. Where are you? Chicago. Why? Because I'm coming to you? She arrived 2 hours later with a travel bag, coffee, and a face that said she already disliked whatever she was about to hear. We sat on the hotel bed while I laid out the papers one by one. By the time I reached the forged signature page, Nora's jaw had gone tight. She did this? She said. I think so. Of course she did. Nora rubbed a hand over her face. My dad used to say Marlene could smile while stealing your wallet. He was right. I just didn't think she'd go after him that hard. I told her about the letter, the house, the hidden account in my name, the deed, the trust. Nora looked at the papers, then at me. And Tyler? He thinks he inherits everything. Does he? I don't know yet. She folded her arms. Then we need to find out before Marlene does. That was the first time in 20 years I felt like I had someone in my corner who was not pretending. Nora and I spent the next 3 days doing what should have been impossible for two women with no legal training and too much coffee in their systems. We met with Harold Stein. We copied documents. We called county offices. We dug through old financial records. Nora had inherited her father's stubbornness and a suspiciously good memory for details. I had the patience of a teacher and the rage of a daughter who had been lied to for half her life. The truth kept widening. My father had once intended to confess everything to Vince before the business collapsed. Marlene had intercepted the conversation and convinced him to delay. Then the scandal hit, and Marlene quietly created a second paper trail. She had used my father's panic to push him into letting her help manage the fallout. Instead of helping, she had skimmed money from the recovery accounts. Over time, she siphoned assets through fake consulting agreements, shell vendors, and one very neat series of transfers disguised as family reimbursements. She was not just greedy. She was patient. And my father, for all his cruelty, had never fully stopped her because he was ashamed to expose his own crimes. Shame made him easy to control. People think power comes from being loud. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly what someone cannot bear to admit. The day we found the trust records, Harold looked almost stunned. Where did you find these? He asked. In a storage unit under Vince's name? Nora said. Marlene forgot my dad had copies. Harold adjusted his glasses and read through them slowly. Then he looked up at me. This changes everything. Good, I said. Because I'm tired of everything being arranged by people who treated me like garbage. He was silent for a beat, then said, Your aunt may still try to contest this. Let her. That was the moment I realized I was no longer afraid of her. Fear had been useful when I was 17. At 30, it was just old furniture I had outgrown. Tyler found me first. I was in the hotel lobby with Nora when my phone rang. His name lit up the screen, and for one idiotic second I almost considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity won. Emma! he said, and his voice had that same half-annoyed, half-smug quality I remembered from childhood. What the hell is going on? I stood very still. Hello to you, too. You're telling people Dad left you the house? I'm telling people the truth, he scoffed. There's no way that's true. You didn't even ask if I was okay. What does that have to do with anything? Exactly nothing, I thought. Instead, I said, Your father wrote a letter before he died. Silence. Then his voice sharpened. What letter? The one that says he used me to hide his money. There was a long pause, long enough that I could hear the hum of the hotel lobby behind me and Nora's careful breathing beside me. Don't be ridiculous, Tyler said at last. Dad made mistakes? Sure. But that's not. Not what? I asked. Not believable because he always preferred you? His voice changed. That's not fair. I almost laughed. You're right. Fair would have been not laughing when he called me a burden. He went quiet. That silence told me more than his words ever could. Tyler, I said, how much did Marlene tell you? Another pause. Then, more carefully, enough. Enough for what? To know you're probably trying to take what Dad wanted me to have. There it was. That old family programming. The instinct to assume I was after something because I had spent my whole life being treated like I was worth less than the family silver. I felt something harden in me. Listen to me, I said. I don't want your money. I want the truth. And if you keep pretending you were the only child in that house, I'm going to drag every lie into daylight. He let out a short laugh that sounded defensive. You always were dramatic. And just like that, I knew he had not changed at all. I ended the call. Nora looked at me. He believed part of it. Of course he did. Why? Because Marlene is feeding him just enough truth to keep him useful. Nora nodded once. That tracks. The next morning, Marlene called. I knew it was her before I answered. There are some voices that do not need identification. They enter a room already holding the knives. Emma, she said, bright and sugary. I'm so glad I reached you. I put the phone on speaker so Nora could hear. You have some nerve calling me. A tiny sigh. I assume you've been to the lawyer. I assume you've been stealing for 20 years. Her tone cooled instantly. That is a serious accusation. It's a truthful one. I was trying to protect this family. I laughed. And this time there was no humor in it. You people love that phrase, protecting this family. It's amazing how often it means hiding what you did. Your father made arrangements for Tyler, she said. You are misunderstanding the situation. Oh, I'm sure that's what you tell yourself. Emma, listen to me carefully. You are grieving. People say things in grief they later regret. The only thing I regret, I said, is believing you. Her voice sharpened. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I looked at Nora, who was already searching through the documents. On the bed, the papers were spread out like a map of a buried city. I think I do. There was a pause. Then Marlene did something I had not expected. She lowered her voice and became almost kind. Your father made mistakes, she said. But he loved this family. He wanted Tyler taken care of. What about me? Another pause. That was answer enough. When she spoke again, her voice had turned hard. If you make this ugly, you will hurt your brother. He's already hurt, I said. He just doesn't know it yet. I hung up. Nora let out a breath. She's going to move fast. Good. Good? I looked at the letter again. At my father's handwriting. At the note that said, do not trust your Aunt Marlene. I've spent 20 years being the person everyone thought they could push aside, I said. I'm done being convenient. The legal fight began 3 days later. Marlene had already filed an emergency petition claiming the documents were questionable and that my father had been in declining mental condition when he wrote them. She brought in a lawyer from one of those glossy downtown firms that charge more for confidence than competence. Tyler, sadly, was listed as the primary heir in her version of the story, which meant he appeared in court with his face set in that stubborn, hurt expression people get when they realize the ground under them was never solid. I wore a navy suit I bought years ago for parent-teacher conferences and interviews. It felt too serious and not serious enough all at once. Nora sat beside me. Harold represented the estate. Marlene arrived in a cream jacket and pearls, looking like grief had been tailored for her. When she saw me, her smile was so thin it barely counted. Emma, she said softly. You look well. So do you, I replied. For someone who apparently just lost her conscience. Her lips tightened, but she kept the smile in place. I understand you're emotional. I stared at her. There it is again, emotional. That's what people say when they want to sound reasonable while doing something rotten. The clerk called the case. The room settled. Marlene's lawyer began with the usual language, contested documents, disputed intent, family discord. He painted my father as an older man, possibly confused, possibly manipulated, definitely too ill to make sound decisions. He suggested that I had resurfaced after years of estrangement, only after learning that money was involved. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then Harold stood. He was not a flashy man. He did not need to be. He put the documents on the stand one by one and let them speak. Bank records, transfer statements, the original deed, the trust papers, the letter, then the blow I knew he had saved for last. A forensic report on the signatures. The signatures on the transfers Marlene had claimed were my father's were not his at all. They had been forged with enough skill to fool a casual glance, but not a trained examiner. The judge leaned forward. Miss Walsh, do you have a response to the allegation that these signatures were falsified? For the first time, Marlene looked uneasy. She adjusted her jacket. I had no knowledge of any forgery. Harold stepped forward again. Then perhaps you can explain why the copies of the same transfers appear in a filing cabinet at your home, with your handwritten notes in the margin? A ripple moved through the courtroom. Marlene went still. My heart thudded once. Hard. Harold had found them. He found the notes because Nora had remembered an old storage rental under Marlene's name and had insisted we check it. Inside, there were folders, receipts, and notes that tied her directly to the asset transfers. Not enough to prove criminal charges on their own, maybe, but enough to destroy the story she had spent years polishing. Marlene's expression shifted from polished outrage to something uglier. For a second, just 1 second, I saw the truth of her. She was scared. The judge called for a recess. When we filed into the hallway, Tyler caught my arm. I turned. His face was pale. Is it true? He asked quietly. I looked at him. He looked younger suddenly. Not younger in age. Younger in the way a person looks when the story they built their whole identity on starts falling apart. Ask yourself why you think I would invent something this ugly, I said. Dad would never. He did, I interrupted. He used my name. He used Mom. He ruined Uncle Vince's life. He called me a burden because it was easier than admitting he was a coward. Tyler's eyes flickered. You're lying. I stepped closer. Then look at the documents. He did not want to. That was the saddest part. Not because he would not believe me. Because part of him already knew he should. He swallowed. Why didn't you tell me? I laughed once, short and sharp. You think I tried? He looked at me like he had never considered that question before. I saw then that Tyler had built his whole adult life inside the story Marlene gave him. Dad loved you. Emma left. Emma was difficult. Emma was resentful. Emma wanted too much. Tyler was the son who stayed, the son who understood, the son who deserved. It was easier for him to believe I was a problem than to believe the family had made one of us into a shield and the other into a scapegoat. I was 17, I said quietly. I left with one bag. I washed dishes to buy books. I skipped meals to keep my electricity on. And all the while, you got to pretend I had been the one who abandoned you. His face shifted. I didn't know. No, I said. You didn't ask. He flinched like I had slapped him. For one brief moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. Then Marlene called him over, and the pity vanished. The hearing stretched into the afternoon. Witnesses were called. Harold introduced the forensic analysis. My aunt's lawyer tried to object, tried to redirect, tried to paint all of us as confused and vindictive. But every time he pushed, another piece of evidence came forward. The bank, the storage unit, the accountant who quietly admitted he had been told not to discuss certain transfers, the notary who recognized Marlene's signature on a document she had sworn she never signed. By the time the judge announced a continuance and temporary asset freeze, Marlene looked like a woman watching a staircase disappear beneath her feet. Outside the courthouse, Reporters were already waiting. That part had not been my plan. I had not known Harold would call in the press after the hearing, but he did. And when the cameras turned on, the whole thing became public in a way Marlene had never feared enough to prevent. She had lived on reputation, on polished smiles, on family names and neighborhood respect, and the assumption that a woman in pearls could not possibly be the one hiding the theft. Now the questions were everywhere. Did you steal from the family business? Did you forge financial records? Did you manipulate the estate? What about the daughter your brother abandoned? The last question came from a reporter whose eyes were sharp enough to make me think she had actually read the documents. Marlene shoved past the microphones and got into her car without answering anything.